Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the instructional video for how to get your paper MLA formatted. All right. And I have an example. So you will be listening to my words, but you'll be seeing what it is that I am talking about. Now, when it comes to MLA formatting, I know that most of you, if not all of you, but most of you are a little bit familiar with this. This is pretty standard in high school and sometimes in junior high. It's pretty standard. You might be familiar with this, but there are things that I need to point out just to make sure that the formatting is correct as is assigned. Okay, you have a 4 to 5 page paper. Making sure that your spacing is right, making sure that you have a header that is correct, making sure that you have the page limits, if your margins are off. All of these things are things that you think that you don't need to think about, but you really do. You need to pay attention to these small details, because if these small details aren't followed, then as a reader, as a professor, we say, well, if they can't look at the small things, then how is it that they're paying attention to the big things, right? Small issues illustrate larger issues. So I'm just warning you, that's just kind of the way that things work. All right. And that's why I'm going to take the time to illustrate how everything is supposed to look. Okay. So make sure that you have a pen ready and a notebook so you can write this stuff down. And if you need to pause at any point, feel free to do it. But right now, I'm going to share my screen and show you the student example paper, which you will have access to. So you can always go back and look at it. Okay. But I'm going to show it to you now as I go over it. So here's the paper, and I'm going to close my little window there. The paper is as this. All right, you might recognize this from previous weeks. If you start at the very top, you will see at the top right-hand corner, it's supposed to be your last name and the page that you are on. So this is the first page. So your last name, for me, it's Schmitz. It would be Schmitz 1. Right? If your last name is Lopez, it would be Lopez 1. If your last name is McCullough, it would be McCullough 1. This student was very good at automatically formatting things, so she was able to actually do this in a header. But quite honestly, I always do it manually. I never do it that way, because if I do it manually, I know that I have it 100% right. So when I say manually, you just go to the very top of your paper, go over to the right, and you type in your last name and you say 1. No commas, no parentheses, no nothing. It looks exactly like what you see here. Okay. And then as we move down, you will notice on the left-hand side, the header. Some students will use the header. I actively tell students, please don't set up a header, because when students set up a header, every single page has the header, and that is not within MLA formatting guidelines. You just need this information on page 1. So please, I am begging you, do not use the header function where you would get up there. As you can see here, it says header. Don't type all this information there. Please do not do that. Do this all manually. And what I want you to do is I want you to note this specific header as it is manually written. I want you to also note the spacing and the specific wording. It goes in this exact order: your name, your full name, so first and last name. The next line is ENG space W space 130. And then you have my name, Dr. Schmitz, because I'm the one who is teaching English W130. And then you have the date that your paper is due. And I want to actually point out, this is how it is supposed to be written out. It's not just numbers. It's not July 24th. It is 24 July, comma, 2022. Now, that's today's date. You will do it for the date that it is due. This is exactly how your header is supposed to look. And the last thing that I really want to make sure Sorry there, folks. That was interesting. I have no idea what just happened, but life being what it is, that's how life works. All right, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Now, as you can see in this header, it is single spaced. If you go up to the paragraph things where you would do your spacing, you would see it's single spaced. It's 100% single spaced. But what I really want everyone to pay attention to is, you see, if you scroll down, you see add space before paragraph, add space after paragraph. You see how that changes the size? You do not want that here or in between any of your paragraphs. Your header here that you will manual type in, you need to make sure it's single spaced and that you have no lines added before or after your paragraph, okay? The next thing on our list here is, look at that title. We are worth more than this. This is a baller title. This is a great title. This title lets you, as the person who is actually writing the paper, to illustrate to your reader what it means, what it's all about. It's a good title. It's a baller title. Terrible titles would be paper number 1. We don't want that. We don't want paper number 1. We don't want English W130 number 1. No, we want a title, an actual title that tells your reader what this paper is going to be about. It doesn't need to be very long, just a title that, if we're talking about workers and them getting information and the due that they are owed, that title tells us what it means. If you just read the title, you have an idea about what the paper is going to be about. So a great title is important, okay? So that's the next thing, this baller title. The next thing after that is, I want everyone to pay attention to the margins, especially you go all the way over to the left, all the way over here. This is a 1-inch margin. This is a 1-inch margin. These are default margins, folks. Do not mess with your margins. We as professors can see if you've messed with your margins. We can see that your paper's narrow. We can see it. And when you have a narrow paper and you just hit that 4-page mark, we know that you really only given us a 3-page paper. The margins screw up how much you can get onto a page. So make sure that your margins are the default 1-inch margins. Don't mess with your margins, okay? Do not mess with your margins. We can see it. I mean, there's no trick under the sun that we haven't seen, all right? And a lot of times students just don't know, or they go from Google Drive to Word documents and there's some sort of weird settings with the formatting. That just means that you have to pay attention to what it is that you're going to be turning in, okay? So make sure that you don't mess with your margins, and make sure that your margins are what is being asked, the default 1-inch margins all the way around, okay? What we then have here is, this is the introduction paragraph. The introduction paragraph illustrates the idea that this paper is going to be covering. What is this paper really about? And then it introduces the author and the text that the author has written that is going to be used in this paper. And it does it for the first one, and it does it with the second one. It ties these things together. Basically, your introduction paragraph introduces your reader to your idea, who we're going to be talking about, and then all the way at the bottom, at the end of the introduction paragraph, you have your strong thesis statement. Not one sentence. You have a strong thesis statement. It's usually about 3 sentences long, being very specific of what's the problem that we're talking about, why is this problem important in the context of this paper, and how does this paper propose to fix that problem? And then every single paragraph works to fight for that position, to fight for that fix, okay? That's where the thesis is, at the end of the introduction paragraph. As noted before, I said, make sure that you pay attention to the spacing in your header. You don't want those extra spaces before and after a paragraph. The same thing works here. Make sure that when you get through your paper, that everything in the paper itself is double spaced. But you want to make sure that it's double spaced, but that it has no spaces before and after. Oh, look, remove that space. You don't want it there. You want to make sure that you don't have that extra stuff. See? And then if it says add space and add space, then that means that you have removed it. Okay? I'm not here to teach you how to use Word, but I'm saying that you need to pay attention to this. Those extra spaces in between paragraphs make your paragraphs look like this. See that extra space, that white space? In a 4 to 5 page paper, that is a waste of space. That's that's like a quarter of a page that you could be using to make your point. So I want everyone to pay attention to that. No extra spaces. Do not hit return to make an extra space, and make sure that when you're doing your double spacing, that you have no space before or after your paragraph. MLA also deals with how we cite things inside the actual paper. Now, I brought it up last week, and I said I was going to go into it a little bit more in detail here. What I want to point out here is that this Wallace quote is what it should look like. Introduced above the idea, we integrate that quote very smoothly. Wallace notes that the so-called real world of men and money and power hums merrily along in a pool of fear and anger and frustration and craving. Close quote, open parentheses, Wallace, comma, 5. Close parentheses, period. Your quote is part of your sentence. Now, in this sentence, the quote actually comes at the end of their sentence, right? So that's a little bit like, well, duh, that's what it's supposed to look like. But I will get papers, I will get assignments that actually have the punctuation there. Well, they'll put the period there because that's where the period was in the sentence, inside the text. No, I again say, you don't do that. You have your period at the end of your sentence, all the way at the end, and your citation, your parenthetical citation, is included in your sentence. So make sure that that period goes on the outside. And if you have any questions or concerns about this, reach out to me, or I say, please, by all means, go to owlpurdue.com. If you just type into Google OWLP, it'll say, do you mean Owl Purdue? And then you can go there if you just need to double check it. But inside your sentences, this is how it's supposed to look, formatting wise. Now, I have another citation here, which is just simply a little bit different. And the reason that I have this highlighted here is Allred writes about having critical discussions to help us stay informed. It's a very flowing sentence. It says who is speaking at the very beginning of it. So you don't, in the parenthetical, need to include the name Allred. We already know that Allred is the one who said it. So you don't need to be redundant and say Allred, comma 15. You don't need to do that. These are two different ways of doing in-text citations. The formatting is 100% correct in both. I want everyone to make sure that your punctuation for your sentence comes at the outside of your quote and the parenthetical at the end. I want everyone to be aware of the fact that if you've already in the flow of your sentence introduced, like Wallace argues that people have their own default settings and blah, blah, blah. You know, if you said Wallace in your sentence, you don't need to say it again. That's redundant. It takes up white space on your page that you could be using to make your argument. So it's really about not being very wasteful. All right. So as far as the MLA content of your paper is concerned, I want to make sure that we all are paying attention to everything that you have to do. And this example is going to be posted in the instructions, but I want to make sure that your spacing is all good. Your margins, your paper itself, your header, that you have your page numbers, last name, page number, all the way through, okay? I want to make sure that you pay attention to these small details because it's very important. I want to make sure that you pay attention to the way that you cite within your actual paragraphs, because if you don't cite, then you're stealing somebody else's words. It's really important that if you're going to be quoting somebody, that you give them credit. You'd want people to give you credit when you did a good job, right? So it's the same thing. MLA formatting is all about detail. And actually writing at the academic level is all about detail. So please, everybody, be detail oriented, because I will be looking at this first before I even get into the papers. Because as I said at the beginning of this video, if we're not paying attention to the small details, then the larger details like the fit it method or the 3 eyes, you know, some of those things will get missed. Be detailed, be specific. All right. All right. I hope that helped everybody. And if you have questions or concerns, you know how to get a hold of me. All right, you smart people, go do what you do.